we've talked about this story before, where he was sold into slavery. His brothers hated him. They wanted to kill him, but they decided, oh, well, let's just sell him. We'll get some money out of it, so they did. And so he was taken away from his family. He was taken away from everything he knew. He went to a foreign country. God blessed him there. And God used that situation, and God, and you know the story, how he promoted him to the second in charge of all of Egypt. And later on in life, years later, when those brothers came back and were begging for food from Joseph, didn't even know who he was, what he said to them was, you meant it for evil, but God meant it for what? God meant it for good. Yeah. So God was using even those evil brothers, those guys that hated him, his enemies. God even used them in a mighty way. And so Joseph was able to love his brothers. And you remember the story, how he revealed himself to him. It's a very touching story there in Genesis. And then there was David. And David had been king in Israel, and everything had been going great. But David made some stupid decisions along the way. And he got involved in adultery, and he had quite a few different wives and children from different wives. And they didn't like each other, and they warred against each other. And you know, all the men, or the boy children, wanted to be the next king. And so they kind of fought amongst each other. But there was one son, Absalom, that kind of won that battle. He decided he was going to be king. And so he got a group of people behind him, and he was going to take over. And this is while David was still alive. And it was scary for David, so much so that he had to leave the city of Jerusalem. He had to leave his palace. And Absalom actually took over for a while and was ruling there in the city. And David was on the run because Absalom was out to kill his own son. And so as all this was happening, David and his army, they were fleeing. They were on the run. And there was this guy on a hillside that started cursing at David. He said, David, you're getting exactly what you deserved. You're a man of bloodshed, and now you're going to be killed. Your own son is after you. He took rocks and he started throwing them at David and his soldiers. This is a little guy over here. His name was Shimei. And Joab, the head of David's army, turns to David and said, you want me to just go over and whack that dog? I'm just going to go over and cut his head off. And David said, no. He said, there's a reason why he's cursing. Let him curse. God has told him to curse me. And David realized that he had made some mistakes in his ministry. And he saw Shimei as a minister of God, as an agent of God. Even though he was cursing the king, which was punishable by death, David said, let him curse. And so they just kept going along, and he kept throwing rocks and dust and cursing, and finally, you know, they got away from him. But David said, just let him curse. And that's what he understood what Jesus is saying here. You know, when someone curses us, we need to bless them. Not curse back, not fight back. We need to bless them and curse not. Well, when I was in college, I was studying. I went to Western Oregon. It wasn't named Western Oregon then. It was Oregon College of Education. And basically, we went to this college to become a teacher. I came to this college to play football. But along the way, I got my teaching degree. And the last thing you do, or you did in those days, was you would have a student teaching experience. You would actually go to one of the schools around the area here, and you would be in a classroom. You'd be supervised by other teachers. And it was sort of a learning experience, a hands-on situation. They still do it today. And my assignment was to go to McNary High School in Salem, which was a huge high school to me. Joe, you grew up in a big high school. You went to North Salem. But this was McNary, and to me it was kind of like a zoo, and I was kind of lost. And because I went to Central, and when I went to Central, it wasn't the University of Central like they're building now. It was a small school. And so I wasn't used to this big school stuff. And also, the normal situation is when you have your student teaching, the college provides a supervisor that you meet with on a weekly basis. And they meet with the teachers. They say, how's he doing? Is there something he needs to work on? Can he improve here and there? And they work together, and they work with you to kind of get you through this process. Well, it just so happened that during that term, the guy that was my supervisor, his mother was dying of cancer down in Arizona. And so he spent the whole term down in Arizona. I went with him one time, the whole term. And I didn't exactly know what I was doing. I made some stupid decisions, and I kind of got in a little bit of trouble in the classroom. I was a kid. I didn't know how to handle a classroom, and the kids were out of control. And consequently, what happens at the end is the teachers write up a little recommendation that goes on your permanent transcript. And what went on my transcript, I wasn't able to read it in those days because this was before the fair practice law where you could read everything that somebody says about you. So they could write things and I wouldn't even know what they were. But as I began to apply for jobs after that, I realized that something was wrong. In fact, somebody said, you know, you should probably have somebody go in and read that transcript for you and tell you what's on there, because it isn't that good. So I had one of my professors go and he read it. He came back and he said, you know, teaching may not be the profession that you want to go into. and you know what? I was bitter against the school, and I was bitter against that supervisor that was supposed to be helping me through that. He wasn't there. He took off to Arizona for, you know, to me he was on vacation. And I was bitter about that, because here I'd studied for 4 years to have this career, and now it was taken away from me. But then someone showed me this principle, that we need to view offenders as agents of God. And it dawned on me, maybe God is trying to tell me something here. Maybe God is trying to tell me, you're not going to be a teacher, at least not in a school, public school. And so the next 2 years were great years in my life, and I've shared this with you before, that my wife and I got under the teaching ministry of a pastor here in Monmouth, and we learned so much in those next 2 years, which never would have happened had I got a teaching job and would have gone to Timbuktu to teach somewhere. And so we praise God for that. We thank God for the offender. And sometimes it's not a person. Sometimes these battles that we face, the enemy might be cancer or some disease. And my sister's here today, Linda, is in the back, and she lives in Scappoose. And a few years ago, her 25-year-old son was diagnosed with lymphoma, and very serious terminal disease. And so we prayed as a family, and Josh went in for treatments. And he had good insurance because he worked for, was it FedEx or UPS? UPS, great insurance. If you're looking for a good insurance program. So because he worked for them, he got great care, and they went through treatments and, you know, radiation and chemo, and in fact, he got a dog that he has named Chemo because of what he went through there. And so he went through this long process, and it was not pretty, it was not fun. He got sick and threw up, and, you know, hair fell out and all the rest, and lost a whole bunch of weight, and got down to, you know, skin and bone, and you know how it goes. And we were all wondering what's going to happen here, and he went through all that, and the cancer was in remission. It was pretty well taken care of. But then it came back, didn't it? Yeah. And so we had to go through the whole thing again. And, you know, the emotional roller coaster that you go through with this. But through this whole process, we began, Linda especially, began to do research on what causes this sort of thing. And what she found, one of the things that she found was that those of us that carry excess weight tend to be more susceptible to certain diseases, including cancers.